I didn't have my headset on, so I haven't got the translation of what you just told everybody about me. So whatever he said, okay, I am a nice guy. Don't worry, relax. The slot after lunch in English is called the graveyard slot, because it's when a lot of people fall asleep or die and end up in the graveyard. But that's not going to happen today. Anyway, thank you very much indeed, first of all, to the organizers, for Enna in particular, for inviting me here to Tallinn, my first ever visit to Estonia. My stepmother was from Karelia, so for a very large part of my life, I grew up hearing Finnish being spoken around me. And so here in Estonia, because I can't speak Finnish or Estonian, the two languages sound very similar. So it's very nice for me to be able to hear that noise again, because my stepmother died several years ago, to hear that sound again of the Estonian language. I say I can't speak Finnish. That's not completely true. Mina rakastan sinua and kipis. That's it. 100% of my Finnish. You now. Is it the same in Estonian? It's similar, almost. So I'll be okay if that's all I know. You can see there. It's vanished. That's my contact details. John C1912. That's WordPress. That's my blog. At John C1912 is my Twitter handle. My email address, johnc1912, is at the bottom, and the one above it is the blogspot. In case you're wondering, 1912 is my birthday. Not the year, the day and the month. So yes, I am a Sagittarius, and I'm here speaking on behalf of e-õpe. That's the web address there that you can see on the contact details sheet. e-õpe is the European NGO Alliance for Child Safety Online, and we have a member here in Estonia, and I'm going to try very hard to say the name correctly. Lastekaitseliit. It's okay? Okay. Right. So that's the Estonian member, and they're very engaged in the work that we do. We have 21 children's organizations from 21 different countries in the European Union in membership of e-õpe. And then we have associate members from Russia, and from Norway, and one other place that I can't remember. But anyway, it doesn't worry us. Estonia is a full member and very actively involved in the work of e-õpe. So we have people like me who work with children and technology across many different parts of the European Union, who come together and share experiences and share knowledge to help shape policy. Because I heard earlier on there was some skepticism being expressed about the importance of policy, but from where we sit, at any rate, unless governments allocate the right resources to this work, and that depends upon policy, a lot of the work that we're all trying to do will never happen, or will not happen as well as it should. And I'll just tell you, I mean, obviously I'm British. Or as British as somebody with a Polish father and an Irish mother can be, and a Finnish stepmother, as I've already said. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the way policy in this space evolved in Britain. And I've been in it from the very beginning, since about 1995, 1996. This whole issue started to become a public debate as internet usage began to grow following the development of the World Wide Web in 1991, 92. So the internet began to appear in people's homes, and children started to use it. And some of the early things that happened on the internet were not very good. And our newspapers, I'm sure it's not the same here in Estonia, where your press, I'm sure, is very balanced and very reasonable, never exaggerates anything, never blows anything out of proportion. So how unlike the media in my own dear country, where several, admittedly, very, very bad things happened that were front page in the newspapers for day after day after day, and week after week it was on television and radio because child pornography was appearing for the first time in large volumes. Children, when chat rooms and so on started to emerge in the late 1990s, we had some terrible cases where young girls usually, but sometimes young boys also, were being contacted by very bad men, pedophiles, and who persuaded them to meet them in real life, where the children were raped. And so our media got very, very engaged with this issue. Nobody was quite sure what this internet thing was, except we knew it was American, which doesn't always guarantee instant affection in Britain, or anywhere else for that matter, except America perhaps. So immediately it was a major issue in the media, so immediately it became an issue for politicians as well. By the way, my wife is a politician. She's a member of the British Parliament. She was a minister in the last government. So I have nothing but respect and affection for politicians and ministers and so on. We're live streaming on the internet. My wife is watching, so I hope you heard that, darling, especially for you. So it became a very big issue within the media in the United Kingdom. And then in 2000, but the emphasis very much was on dealing with criminal behavior that was affecting children in a very bad way, typically either child pornography or paedophile activity. So in 2001, our Home Secretary, which is basically the minister in charge of the police and prisons and law enforcement, or it was then, he set up a government task force on child protection on the internet. And then we only had one minister, and so one set of civil servants, and the whole focus of policy was around the criminal law, policing, and things of that kind. As our understanding of the complexity of the issues about children and young people's use of the internet grew, so we were blessed. We got a second ministry involved, and that was the Education Ministry. So then we had two ministers and two sets of civil servants, and everything, of course, became more than twice as complicated as it had been before. Then in 2010, we had an election. We got a new government. They decided that two ministers and two sets of civil servants were not enough. And now we are blessed with three ministers and three sets of civil servants, because now we have the Department for Culture and Media involved in our arrangements. And in fact, they have become sort of the lead ministry in this area. And that's the ministry that deals with internet policy, connectivity. They're the one that lead on relationships with the internet industry, the ISPs in particular, but also the mobile phone companies and the tablet manufacturers, handset manufacturers, and all of that kind of thing. So that all seems logical. It was part of the development, and it was part of how our understanding of the complexity of this area of policy had developed over time. Now, we're even more fortunate because we're going to get a fourth minister and a fourth set of civil servants, because we now understand also that the Ministry of Health needs to be involved, because a number of the questions, particularly ones I'm going to be speaking about how to reach vulnerable children and marginal families, or families living, like people who don't have a permanent home, and very poor people, and people from minority communities and that kind, then the approach that we need to develop, we think, is probably more in line with some of the things that we're doing on public health. So now we're going to have four ministers, four ministries, four sets of civil servants, and it hasn't stopped there, because our Prime Minister, David Cameron, he has his own special envoy as well. He has a special minister who just looks at this area of policy for him as Prime Minister. And I have to say, by the way, I've never voted Conservative in my life, by the way, so this is not a party political broadcast for the present government. But our Prime Minister has 3 children, right? They are 5, 8, and 12. Our Prime Minister has a passion for this question of child protection and child safety. And it's been fantastic to see the way that he has kept attention and kept focus on this area of policy within the British sort of government policy space. So he's appointed, as I say, essentially a 5th minister, his own special envoy, a very, very able woman MP called Claire Perry, who sits on the body that coordinates all of these things in the United Kingdom. And there is no doubt that because of the political pressure and the political impetus that has been put behind this area of policy, that within the UK, lots and lots of things have been happening of a very positive nature. And I'm going to come on to those in a minute. So just to be clear, although we're going to be speaking, or I'm going to be speaking, about some of the less desirable, the less savory, the less wonderful aspects of what happens to children and young people when they engage with the technology, I hope you understand that it's against the background of being a huge enthusiast for what the technology can do, and certainly the way that it's transformed lots and lots of young people's lives, obviously not just in schools, but their social lives and personal lives in all sorts of ways. I work, for example, I have worked in the past with a group of children who, for various reasons, their parents were extremely ill, couldn't work, but the children, we're talking now about 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, had become carers for their parents. They'd become little adults, little grown-ups, because their parents didn't have the capacity to go to do the shopping, do the cleaning, things of this kind. Of course, there was help from the state and from the social services departments, but each one of these children in their own families were in varying degrees quite isolated. There was nobody, they didn't know anybody else like them who were having to face the same kind of challenges, the same kind of issues every day. We were able to, through one of the children's organizations that I work with, we were able to put together an online group where children, some of them lived in the north of Scotland and some lived down in the southwest of England, in Cornwall and Devon, in quite remote places, and they were able to talk to each other and empathize with each other, and it was a very unique and special opportunity that those children had that could not have existed if it wasn't for the internet. So, please, I'm giving you that as an example because I want you to understand where I'm coming from, which is very, very positive about what the technology can do. But equally, we shouldn't be blind to the fact that there is another side to it as well. And if we all want to get the maximum amount of benefit from the internet and all of the different digital technologies that now depend upon the internet or hook into it in one way or another, we all have to feel confident that it can be a safe place and a good place, not a risky place, not a place where bad things can happen and to children. Now, we're never going to eliminate all risk. We're never going to eliminate all danger. I mean, more people get injured or killed even, or die, falling down the stairs in their home every year than I do on the roads or in other ways. But we don't all live in bungalows. We don't live all in flat houses with no stairs. So risk is always going to be a part of whatever we do. But that doesn't mean we don't have a responsibility wherever we can to reduce the risk, minimize the risk to the greatest extent possible, particularly where young children are concerned, and their younger children are really the focus of our work. Just to be clear, my brief stops at age 17. Okay, so I'm not talking about university students, I'm not talking about people who are legally adults. All of the focus of the work that we do essentially is with children under the age of 18. So, Bill Gates once famously said that when it comes to technology, we tend to overestimate the short-term impact of technology and underestimate the long-term impact of technology. In other words, what he's saying is a new thing comes out, a new gadget, a new service, a new product comes out, and there's a huge sort of commotion, and if you don't understand about this new service or you don't understand about this new product, you're 19th century, you're a boring old git, as we say in English, and everybody's convinced that this is the future, and hey, guess what? A few years later, it's dead. But what we tend to miss is the long-term effects of a process of technological change. By the way, I used to be a vice president of Fox Media, technically working out of California. Fox Media owned MySpace, okay? Remember MySpace? Anybody remember MySpace? Okay. I can remember newspaper articles being written about MySpace by the Financial Times, by the way, the one I have in mind in particular, saying, this is it, MySpace is here forever. It's clearly going to be the dominant social platform indefinitely into the future, because all of these young people have been joining it. They've been investing so much time and energy constructing their profiles, putting their photographs up there, telling people about what music they like. Rupert Murdoch, yes, I worked for Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch and MySpace is here forever. Guess what? I only lasted in the job for 3 years because then Facebook came along and killed off MySpace. So that's an example of how people, particularly people in the technology industry, they get very excited and very keen on the new thing, the latest gadget, the latest application or whatever. And they tend to miss, or we tend to miss, the longer term consequences of some of these technological changes. And our job, I think, as leaders, as thinkers in this space, is to be more reflective about some of these sorts of issues and try to take a more balanced view. And one of the reasons why this is the case, of course, is that the internet, in the way that it's developed, has been completely unprecedented. I mean, I don't buy all of these analogies about, VHS recorders and ink and pencils and all of that, because the internet is genuinely a paradigm shift. There has never been a technological development on the scale that the internet has produced, because it's brought together so many different individual technologies and packaged them into one single place. You know, think about news, think about radio, think about TV, think about movies, think about all of these things being brought together in a way that was never previously possible. And the speed, the simple speed at which this has happened is truly astonishing. I don't know if you've seen these or heard these statistics before, but it took 75 years for there to be 50 million telephone users in the world from the invention of the telephone. 75 years before that we had 50 million telephone users on the planet. From the invention of the radio, it was 38 years before the first 50 million radio users existed. TV, it took 13 years to reach 50 million. The internet, it took 4 years to reach 50 million users. And now, as we know, we count internet users in billions, not millions. So one of the reasons why a lot of us, I think, are having to catch up is because we've never before had to deal with or think through the consequences of technological change on the scale or at the speed at which the internet has presaged. And you know, there's a great writer in the English language. He was Irish, but he wrote in the English language, called Oscar Wilde. You probably heard of him, and he has this great saying about how there's only one thing worse than people talking about you, and that's people not talking about you, okay? I paraphrase and adapt that for the internet space, and I say there's only one thing worse than children not having access to the internet, and it's children not having access to the internet, because it's become the defining technology of our age. And whatever we might think about individual applications or individual platforms or programs, there is no doubt that the main thrust of what the internet and the digital revolution that it sparked represents is here for the indefinite and foreseeable future. And the last government in my country worked that out fairly early on, and they did a study because they were concerned about reports that were coming from schools about the children who didn't have access to the internet, who weren't able to do their homework online in the evenings like a lot of the other kids were able to. So they commissioned various people to go and look at this, and what they concluded was that not having the internet, if you were a school student, meant it would contribute to your social isolation. You could be singled out as the weird kid or the poor kid, and that could make you more subject to bullying, and it meant that your social relationships were more difficult if everybody else is on Facebook or everybody else is tweeting and exchanging information online, and you're not doing because you haven't got the basic equipment to do it. That's going to mark you out. That's going to mark you out as different. And being different, as we know, for young people is not always something that they relish. So they set up a program, and the whole idea behind the program was to make sure that every child of school age, irrespective of how much their parents earned, could have a broadband connection and a computer, a desktop or a laptop, it's a few years ago now, in their home. And that was a great success. I think they spent something like £300 million on the program in its first year, just making sure that kids who didn't have the computers at home, usually, by the way, because their parents couldn't afford it, there were some religious groups, there were some small interest groups who didn't want the internet on principle, or they didn't want computers in their home on principle, but overwhelmingly, the reason why a child didn't have the internet at home was because their parents couldn't afford it. So we gave out the government gave out these vouchers that you could go to a big computer store and get a device, and you also had a voucher to get you a broadband connection free for at least 1 year. So then, the election came along, we had a change of government, they decided Britain is now bankrupt, we can't afford to do anything. So they abolished the program, except for disabled kids. They did preserve that program for children who had disabilities. So if you had a learning disability or a physical disability, that program is still there to make sure that that class of children or that group of children still do get access to the internet. We've heard from Bob and from others about the doubts that still remain about the precise nature of the impact of all of this technology on educational attainment levels and exam results and that kind of thing. There were a number of studies done in the UK a few years ago now, showing the difference between children who did have internet access at home and those who didn't in terms of their exam results. And there was no doubt that at the year end, when those studies were done, kids who had the internet at home and kids who were able to use search engines and so on to do research for their homework were getting half a grade, sometimes a grade better results than kids that didn't. That's all a bit irrelevant now because it is so widespread. It's very difficult now to detect any difference in terms of having or not having the internet in a child's home environment. So, I told you I would be speaking more about the more darker side of the internet, but just let me make this point to open with. I think that some of the debates about online safety and things of that kind get completely polarized on an entirely false basis. There are those who seriously argue, the kids are all right. The kids are cool. There's no need to worry. You're just an old hen flapping about. You don't understand. Just let the kids get on with it and everything will be fine. And then there are those who say the internet is a threat to civilization as we know it. It means the end of everything. You've got to you've got to tie everything down with filters and blocking and all of these kinds of things to make it as difficult as possible for anything bad to happen to a child. Well, of course, as usual, with both sorts of extreme positions, the truth is somewhere in the middle. I am absolutely not in favor of locking all children in a cyber prison. Absolutely not. But I am not yet convinced that we've done everything that we can at a technical level to try to make the internet a better and safer place for kids. And it is a partnership. I mean, you hear this phrase all the time being spoken about in the context of the internet, about multi-stakeholderism, the need for public-private partnerships and so on. And it's absolutely true. We need parents, schools, children themselves, and the industry all to be contributing to finding a way to make the internet a better place. And it's the government's job overall, sitting on top of all that, to make sure that that system is working. And I described earlier how we're trying to do it in the UK. But it's important to dispel a number of myths as well about children and the internet. I know I don't need to say this to those of you in the room who are teachers, but for the sake of completeness, I'll make the obvious point that not all children are the same. Not all children, and you can split them up by age, by class, by a whole range of different ways. The things that you need to do to help very young children understand and use the technology are very different from the things you need to do with 15, 16, and 17-year-olds. So when I hear people talking about children and young people in the internet in very broad sweeps of language, saying, oh yeah, children need this or young people need that, it's not always a very helpful way of thinking about it, because there is a great variety of capabilities, talents, expectations, vulnerabilities amongst children, just as there are amongst adults. And not all kids are super cool. I mean, not the idea that every kid goes online and is completely confident about everything that they're doing, and that they're exploring every website, and they're going all over the internet and making new connections and learning new things all the time. It's simply not true. Some fantastic research has been done by Professor Sonia Livingstone, and it was covered here in Estonia as well. And it shows that children are just as conservative in many ways as adults are. They tend to use a relatively small number of applications. They tend to use a relatively small number of websites. So this idea that a lot of people have in their head that if you're young, you must be okay about the internet and you must be okay about the technology, it's simply not true. There's a great variety of abilities, talents, orientations, expectations among young people, just as there are amongst older people. And let's not forget, this is not a utilitarian debate. When we think about public policy, we're not simply saying, let's do the greatest good for the greatest number. We have a moral and a legal obligation to every single child, every single young person. We were hearing earlier about important to be learner-centered in the way that we teach and the way that learning happens in the classroom. Well, that's a very, very important idea when we think about children's safety, because not all children and young people will have the same needs as all of the others. Again, I'll refer back to the United Kingdom. We have this system for measuring the level of disability or things of that kind that children have. Something like, I think it's 1.5% to 2% of every child in a British school has been subject to what we call an educational statement. That's to say they've been assessed as having a learning difficulty or a physical disability or something of that kind that renders them in need of extra help. So if you've got a statemented child in your school, it generally means that you will get an extra teaching assistant, sometimes just for that one child, so that they can take part in lessons in mainstream schooling. So these are children who've been measured and assessed as having quite a significant learning difficulty or some other problem that renders them in need of extra help and support within the education system. We've then got another set of children that don't need that sort of specific help and attention, but have got some kind of issue that the school has been made aware of. It might be trouble at home, or it might be trouble with the police. There could be a whole range of things, again, which marks individual children out. And all in all, something like 1 in 5 of children in school at any one time will be known to the school authorities, will be known to the teachers as having some sort of issue, something going on in their life that marks them out as being different from the 4 out of 5 that are not in that matrix, if you see what I mean. So 1 in 5 children and young people who are or could be within a sphere of emotional or learning difficulties or all of those sorts of things, that's a very, very high proportion. So again, I make that point simply to illustrate that when we make these big generalizations about children and young people and what they want or what they need, we forget that quite often a very large proportion of them will be, perhaps some of them, in very serious need. And by the way, that 1 in 5 broadly works out in the adult world too. The British Psychiatric Association or whatever, they've done estimates in which they say adults, roughly 1 in 5 adults at some point in their life will need some kind of psychiatric support, some kind of counselling, something to deal with some kind of emotional trauma or upheaval in their life. So again, kids are not so very different from the rest of us. And when we talk about the internet and digital technologies generally, it's always important to remember that very small percentages still produce very, very big numbers of human beings. I mean, think about Facebook, for example. 1.whatever billion members now. If Mark Zuckerberg had a report arriving on his desk telling him that 99% of, he won't ever get a report like this, by the way, but let's just assume for the moment Mark Zuckerberg were to get a report on his desk saying that 99% of all Facebook users in the world are deliriously happy with the service that Facebook is providing, he would be completely over the moon. The idea that you could get 99% levels of satisfaction with your service is every managing director, every company's dream. But 1% of Facebook users is 10 million human beings. And we have an obligation even to that 1%, because that 1% is, in the case of Facebook, for example, 10 million human beings. So it's very important to remember, when we speak about Facebook, it's not about the internet, it's not a utilitarian thing. We have an obligation to every child as an individual, and small percentages can produce very, very large numbers. And I'm going to now speak about very young children, but first of all, I'm going to make a very shocking revelation. I hope you're ready for this. Bob earlier mentioned that he was a grandfather, and nobody in the room shook their head in disbelief. You were all completely okay with the idea that Bob is a granddad. Well, guess what? So am I. I know you're all thinking it's impossible, he looks too young, but truthfully, I am a grandfather too. And I want to introduce my granddaughter to you. This, I think, I'm going to try and check this out. This is a selfie. You know a selfie? My 7-month-old granddaughter, Ivy, her mother, my daughter, left her iPad on the floor, and Ivy crawled all on top of the iPad and somehow managed to take a selfie. Now, she hasn't yet worked out how to make that an email attachment or to post it to Facebook. But pretty soon, I'm sure she will. But here's the serious point about this when we speak about internet policy and young people. In the UK, and I'm pretty sure it'll be similar here in Estonia, over a third of 3- and 4-year-old children are going online now. A third, 37%. These are numbers measured, by the way, by our own statutory regulator. 6% of 3- and 4-year-olds are accessing the internet via a tablet. 28% of 3- and 4-year-olds have their own tablet. And that number, by the way, the 28% of 3- and 4-year-olds having access to a tablet or having their own tablet, that figure was published last October. So it's based on data, essentially, that's, well, getting on for a year old now. In the run-up to Christmas, a number of companies brought out very cheap tablets, and there was a huge splurge, a huge growth in the sale of tablets. So my guess is the next time these numbers are being published, my guess is that 3- and 4-year-olds' ownership of tablets and 3- and 4-year-olds going online, either through their tablet or through some other device, is going to be creeping up to around 50% or possibly even higher. Now, often, as educators, when we speak about online safety and children's use of the technology, we speak about media literacy and education as the way of reaching out and trying to ensure that children don't get into any real difficulties. I'm not sure how media literacy works with certainly not with my 7-month-old granddaughter, but I'm not sure how it works even with 3- and 4-year-olds. So this gets me back to my point about the responsibility of the industry, which I define very, very broadly, by the way. It's not just about ISPs and mobile phone companies. A professor at the University of Plymouth in England called Andy Phippen, he published some research where he interviewed teachers in the first year of secondary school, so that's dealing with children aged 11 or above, and he also spoke to teachers in our primary school, so that's basically from age 4 or 5 up to the age of 11. And the conclusion that he reached, that Andy Phippen reached in his published research, was that by the age of 11, most children, when they go to the big school, their habits, their knowledge of using the internet are already fairly well developed. And so the point about that research was to say that if we want to take this, if we want to do the best we possibly can for children, we need to start at a very, very young age. We need to be starting at primary school age. So I'm getting close to the end of my time. So I'll just make one final point about one of the issues that the EU Kids Online survey did, and this was a gigantic survey, interviewed 25,000 children across, I can't remember how many different countries in Europe, and they asked, one of the questions that they asked the children was, what is the thing that you see on the internet when you go online that upsets you most? And the thing, this will come as a surprise, I'm sure, to many people, but the thing that came out top, there were lots and lots of individual topics that children didn't like or things that children didn't like that they met on the internet, but the thing that came out top was pornography. Now, I think the word pornography has become an obstacle to understanding. I think a lot of people, perhaps particularly older people, when you mention the word pornography to them, they think that you're talking about the centerfold in Playboy, or they think that you're talking about pictures of ladies dancing without a bra on the beach in Marbella or somewhere like that. They obviously haven't been on the internet for quite to have a look at the kind of stuff that's out there. The kind of material that is routinely available on the internet is exceptionally graphic. In fact, you can only really call it woman-hating violence. And a lot of kids who are exposed to that find it deeply shocking. And here's the thing, I don't know about in Estonia, but in my country, it's illegal for that stuff to be published to children under the age of 18. Our law is very clear. It says, if you want to publish that kind of material, you must have a mechanism in place to ensure that children under the age of 18 can't get access to it. We've never said there shouldn't be any pornography on the internet. That's a silly thing to say because it's impossible and illiberal to say that. But we have said it shouldn't be accessible to children under the age of 18. But it is. We did a study that was published just a few weeks ago. They looked at 1,266 pornographic websites that British people were accessing, only one of which was actually British, the rest were overseas. 44,000 children in 1 month between the ages of 6 and 11 were found to be accessing these kinds of pornography sites. And what we're saying is to the banks and to the credit card companies, you need to step in and stop it, because the websites aren't going to stop it until you stop them making money out of it, because that's what they are doing. I'm getting told to shut up, so I will. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. It was really very interesting. So, as I understood, you don't have any translation now?
I don't.
Oh, okay. So
it's there.
Just one question or remark.
In English?
Yes, in English, I mean.
Oh, okay. No, I can take it in Estonian now if...
Või eesti keeles. Paluks.
Yeah, I'm on it. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
But no question.
Lapsed. Lastest, jutt on lastest. Liiga vanad. Pöör.
Te jäite nüüd pooleli oma jutuga, et kui te nüüd lõpetaksite selle jutu ära, et millised need meetmed siis on, mida te nende laste jaoks, sellele saidile pääsemise jaoks siis seate?
Okay. So, in relation to the sites which are technically illegal, I think the best way would be for the banks and the credit card companies to refuse to process payments from those sites. About £200 million a year is spent by people in the United Kingdom on these sites, which are allowing that material to be presented to children under the age of 18. It's putting a huge amount of pressure on particularly young girls, but not just girls, boys as well, to behave like porn stars. It's creating this whole sort of selfie culture and so on is part of it. So we think it's a very serious issue that they're not stopping access to this thing. Credit card companies and banks are essentially allowing it, because if the companies couldn't make money out of it, they wouldn't be doing it. We've stopped illegal gambling by children in the United Kingdom on the web, because we have an age verification system that works for gambling sites. Porn sites could do the same. I do think filters are going to be very important, particularly for younger children. 3-year-olds, you put a 3-year-old on a tablet that's connected to the internet, you're not going to be able to supervise everything that they do, so you are going to need some technical help.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much.